Okay, stop what you are doing. I need you to think back, really think back to a specific kind of October night. Maybe you were 8 year old. Maybe you were 12. The leaves were crunching outside. The air had that specific sharp apple crab bite that only exists in autumn. Pumpkins we are glowing on porches and somebody in your house. A parent, an older sibling, maybe even you had thrown on a movie. And the second those opening notes hit, the second you heard that organ, that whimsical, slightly unhired musical score that somehow managed to be both creepy and cozy at that exact same time. You are gone, completely transported, lifted right out of your living room and dropped down onto the cobblestone street of Slim. Masked artist and three very specific women are ahead, a bold and a brunette were checking clicking on your television screen, and you did not know whether to be terrified or completely in love with every single second of it. I am talking, of course, about the Sanderson sister. For nearly 30 years, people Hocus Pocus held a scared place in the cultural memory of an entire generation of Americans. It was not a box office smash when it came out in 1993. Critics did not exactly roll out the red carpet for it. Disney itself was not entirely sure what to do with it. It was released in July of all months, which meant it missed Halloween entirely on its theatrical run, and yet the magic of that movie, the sheer charismatic intensity of better Betty Midler, Kate Najimy, and Sarah Jessica Parker, turned it out something that no Hollywood executive could have engineered on purpose. It became a Halloween tradition, a ritual, a film you did not just watch, you experienced it every single year like a warm, slightly crushed blanket wrapped around your soul. Think about that for a second. This film has been part of the annual American Halloween ritual for three consecutive decades. Kids who watched it in 1993 grew up and introduced it to their own children. College students watch it a Halloween parties, adult rewatch it on October evenings and feel something shift in their chest, something warm and nostalgic and a little bit magical. The Sanderson sisters have achieved something that most fictional characters never achieve. They have become cultural mythology. They belong to Halloween the way Jack o' lanterns belong to Halloween. The way candy corn belongs to Halloween, love it or hate it, it's always there. And what's remarkable is how that mythology deep open depend our time rather than fading unlike so many films of its era that got their moment of popularity and then quietly ret- uh, retreated, retreated into the video story achieves Hocus Pocus grew. It found new audience every single October. The Disney Channel played it relentlessly, and relentlessly, sometimes twist in a single day throughout the late 90s and the entire stretch of the 2002, which meant that kids who were not born when the film came out were still encountering it and falling in love with it and adding it to their personal Halloween mythology. There is something almost biological about this process, the way certain films become encoded in the cultural DNA of generation, passed from elder siblings of younger ones, from parents of children, from college roommate recommendation to college roommate discovery. By the time Disney started seriously entertaining the idea of sequel, and let me tell you, discussions about a sequel had been floating around Hollywood for years before anything got officially greenlight. The Sanderson sisters were not just characters for a movie. They were Halloween icons of a level of jack-o'-lanterns and costumes and trick or treat candy. Every October, social media files up with pictures of Sanderson sister costumes, fan account dedicated to the film have hundreds of thousands of followers. They are Hocus Pocus method, cocktails, candles, decoration, and merchandise of every conceivable variety. That this is what a film looks like after 30 years of genuine, sustained, totally organic love from its audience. So when Disney announced that a sequel was actually happening, that we are going back to Slam, that the Sanderson sisters were actually returning off our screen, the internet broke, and I mean that almostly literally. The social media response was instantaneous, massive, and deeply personal, because this was not just news about a movie. This was news about something people had tracked safely into their most crashed memories. This was Destiny reaching into the emotional valute and saying, "We are going back in there." The announcement post from Destiny accumulated millions of likes in hours. Better Mitlet, Catchy, Najmi, and Sarah Jessica Parker have all celebrated on their own social media, and the response of each of them was overwhelming. Not the polite enthusiasm you get for most entertainment announcements, but sometimes something more uncontained, more visceral, more like deep than execute existent relief that was that this was actually happening, a relief that they had not missed their chance. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because a sequel like this, a sequel or to a movie that literally has no business being disbelieved, a movie that performed at the movie box at the box office and got lukewarm reviews, and somehow become one of the most crashed film in recent America pop culture, is one of the most dangerous creative proposition in Hollywood, genuinely dangerous.
You can make a great original film, and people will appreciate it. But when you touch something that people have grown up with, something that lives in their childhood memories like a golden artifact preserved in amber, you are walking a razor's edge. Because if you get it wrong, you don't just make a bad movie. You potentially tarnish something precious. You potentially take a perfect memory and leave a smudge on it that never fully goes away. The history of Hollywood is littered with the wreckage of beloved properties handled clumsily in sequels or reboots. Franchises with a follow-up felt like a cash grab, a cynical calculation, a machine-generated product wearing the costume of something people loved. The audiences for those films aren't just disappointed, they're betrayed because they brought their love to theater or their streaming device, and the film couldn't honor it, couldn't meet the love where it lived. So the question that fans were asking from the moment the first trailer dropped to approximately 6 billion collective views wasn't just, is this good? The question was deeper and more personal and more vulnerable than that. The question was, did they get it right? Did they treat it with the care it deserves? Did they understand what this thing means to us? I've watched Hocus Pocus too. I've watched it more than once, under different circumstances, in different moods, paying attention to different things. I've sat with it, picked it apart, thought carefully about what it does and doesn't do, where it soars and where it stumbles. And what I'm about to give you is a full, honest, deeply comprehensive breakdown of everything this movie is. The story told beat by beat, the characters examined in full, the themes unpacked carefully, the craft assessed honestly, and the final verdict delivered without sentiment clouding the judgment. So grab your candy corn. And yes, I'm aware that candy corn is controversial. I stand firm. Light your black flame candle and let's get into it. Stay with me, because this one's going to be a whole ride. Hocus Pocus 2 was released on September 30th, 2022, exclusively on Disney+. And right there, right in that delivery method, right in that specific choice of platform over theatrical release, you already have a lens through which to evaluate it. This wasn't designed as a prestige cinematic experience you'd see in a theater with a tub of popcorn and that specific communal hush that falls over a crowd before the lights dim. This was designed to be exactly what the first movie became, a cozy autumnal, sit-on-the-couch with your family on a Friday in October viewing experience. A fireside movie, a hot chocolate movie, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, for this particular property, it might be the most appropriate delivery mechanism imaginable. The film was directed by Ann Fletcher, a director whose resume includes a proposal and 27 dresses. Films that, interestingly, deal very specifically with the dynamics of female relationships and comedic ensemble chemistry. That's not a random casting of a director. That's a deliberate choice, and we'll talk about why it was the right one. The screenplay was written by Jen D'Angelo, whose background is primarily in television comedy, and that DNA definitely shows up in the film's texture and pacing. There's a looseness of comedic sequences, a willingness to let a joke breathe and extend, that feels more like peak TV comedy writing than traditional screenplay structure. Sometimes that's a strength. Occasionally, as we'll discuss, it becomes a liability. Now, let's talk about the cast, because that's really the heartbeat of anything Hocus Pocus related. The Sanderson sisters are back in full force, and I genuinely cannot stress enough how meaningful that is. Bette Midler returns as Winifred Sanderson, the imperious, scene-consuming, magnificently theatrical eldest sister who has spent 3 centuries as one of Hollywood's most iconic villains without ever quite being a villain in the traditional sense. Kathy Najimy reprises her role as the lovably dim, physically comedic, heart of gold Mary Sanderson, the middle sister who makes you feel like everything is going to be fine even when everything is absolutely not going to be fine. And Sarah Jessica Parker is back as a ethereally strange, boy-obsessed, gorgeous and unsettling Sarah Sanderson, who floats through every scene like she's receiving transmissions from a frequency the rest of the U.S. can't hear. These 3 women have not lost a single ounce of what made them so magnetic in the original. If anything, and this is something I want you to really hear, they seem to be having even more fun. There's a looseness, a freedom, a complete absence of inhibition in their performances that suggests actresses who know exactly who they are as these characters and have arrived at a place of pure, joyful trust in the material. The chemistry between them is not the chemistry of people who just met on a set. It is the chemistry of people who have been in each other's creative orbit for decades, who know each other's rhythms and tendencies and timing, and who genuinely love working together. The new cast of younger protagonists is led by Whitney Peak as Becca, the film's central hero, a teenage witch in training who inadvertently summons the Sandersons on her 16th birthday through a chain of circumstances we'll walk through in detail. She's joined by Lilia Buckingham as Cassie and Belisa Escobedo as Izzy, her 2 best friends who form a human emotional core of the story. Doug Jones also returns as the iconic zombie Billy Butcherson, the boyfriend Winifred poisoned and killed in the original for the dual offense of cheating on her and kissing Sarah, which in Winifred's Moore universe was frankly worse. And Sam Richardson joins as a delightful Gilbert, a local magic shop owner with a complicated backstory and an even more complicated relationship to the legacy of the Sanderson sisters. The film was released to an absolutely massive viewership within its opening weekend on Disney+. It broke streaming records and became one of the most watched Disney Plus titles ever at that point in the platform's history. Audiences were hungry for this in a way that goes beyond ordinary anticipation. They were hungry for it the way you're hungry for something specific that you haven't had in a very long time. Critics were more divided. It holds somewhere around the mid-50s to low 60s on Rotten Tomatoes, depending on when you're looking, which is actually almost exactly comparable to the original film's critical reception, a fact that feels, depending on your perspective, either deeply ironic or perfectly poetic. The cultural context here matters enormously. By 2022, nostalgia IP was a dominant commercial force in Hollywood. We had Top Gun, Maverick, which broke box office records and reminded everyone that a sequel made with genuine love and craft could transcend the cynicism surrounding its existence. We had the Ghostbusters revival in Afterlife, which took the more reverent and perhaps overly cautious approach. We had an entire streaming landscape absolutely saturated with legacy sequels, reboots, and reimaginings of beloved properties, some of which understood what made the original special, many of which did not. Hocus Pocus 2 arrived in the middle of all of that. And while it could easily be dismissed as just another piece of that nostalgia machine, another studio reaching into the vault and monetizing a beloved memory, I think that's too reductive. There's something genuinely sincere about this film's relationship to the original, something that elevates it above pure commercial calculation, though not without some notable creative stumbles that we will discuss honestly when we get there. One more critical piece of context before we dive into the story itself. The original 1993 Hocus Pocus was directed by Kenny Ortega, the same Kenny Ortega who gave us Newsies and later High School Musical, and starred those three iconic leads alongside Omri Katz as Max, the skeptical teenage boy who accidentally lit the candle, Thora Birch as his little sister Danny, who is honestly one of the best child performances in any family film of that decade, and Vanessa Shaw as Allison, Max's love, interest, and the first person in the story who actually takes the supernatural threat seriously. The film was set in Salem, Massachusetts, where the actual 1692 witch trials took place. The trials where 19 people were hanged, and one was pressed to death under accusations of practicing witchcraft, in one of the most horrifying examples of mass hysteria and institutionalized fear in American history. Hocus Pocus has always operated in the shadow of that real horror, using it as backdrop, using the witch figure as something both scary and empowering, using Salem's specific haunted geography as an emotional setting. The sequel leans into that context even more explicitly, particularly in its prologue, which we're about to discuss at length. The original underperformed at the box office, but found its audience on cable TV, specifically on the Disney Channel and ABC Family, where they're essentially every Halloween season for decades. Children who hadn't been born when the film was released encountered it through those broadcasts and added it to the mythology of their own Octobers. It accumulated cultural power gradually, slowly, and unstoppably. By the time Disney finally greenlit a sequel, they were working with material that had achieved something genuinely rare, genuine beloved status, earned over time, across generations, through pure audience love rather than manufactured hype. Hocus Pocus 2 had the extraordinary challenge of honoring that legacy, while also telling a new story with new characters, and finding something genuinely new to say about the world and the people in it. How did it do? Let's walk through it, scene by scene, beat by beat, moment by moment. The film opens not in the present day, but in the past, and this is one of the smartest structural choices the movie makes, because it reframes everything that follows. We're in Salem, Massachusetts. The year is 1653, 39 years before the infamous witch trials. And what we're seeing is a young Winifred Sanderson, rendered here with remarkable physical and tonal accuracy by Taylor Henderson in a brief but genuinely powerful performance. On the eve of something terrible. It's Winifred's 16th birthday, and the Reverend Trask, played with cold, calculated, self-righteous menace by Tony Hale in performance that is entirely against type and entirely effective, has arranged for her to marry one of the town's young men. Not a man she chose. Not a man she loves or admires, or even particularly likes. A man the Reverend has decided is appropriate for her, because in Salem in 1653, a girl's future is not her own to determine. It belongs to the men of the community, filtered through the authority of the church, justified by scripture and custom, and a particular brand of religious control that shaped Puritan New England. Winnie, being Winnie, finds this utterly repugnant. She's wild. She's defiant. She has a power crackling behind her eyes that no corset and no arranged marriage and no amount of Reverend Trask's unctuous disapproval can contain. She is already, even at 16, entirely herself. And what she is cannot be folded into the shape the community wants her to occupy. And here's where the film lands its first real emotional punch. Because Winifred doesn't face this alone. Her sisters, Mary and Sarah, are right there, standing behind her, standing with her, without hesitation or qualification. And Winnie doesn't just resist the marriage. She runs, and her sisters run with her, without question, without a moment of deliberation or calculation. They run because she runs, because where she goes, they go, because there is no version of their lives that does include each other. The loyalty between these three women is established immediately and unambiguously. These are not just witches. These are sisters in the deepest, most unshakable, most bone-level sense of the word. The Reverend Trask pursues them into the forest, the forbidden forest on the outskirts of Salem, the place where, As the townspeople say with hushed, frightened, half-believing voices, the devil walks. And it's here, in the dark heart of those ancient, moss-covered, moonlit woods, that something extraordinary happens. The girls encounter another witch, a real, ancient practice, genuinely powerful, which known as the Mother Witch, played with genuinely haunting, bone-deep grace by Hannah Waddingham. Now, if you're watching this and wondering how Hannah Waddingham ended up in this movie, the answer is elegant. Someone very smart made a very good casting call. Her screen time is limited, but she commands every single frame with an effortless, almost preternatural authority. The Mother Witch is old, genuinely, cosmically old, not in makeup years, but in the weight she carries, the stillness in her body, the way she speaks with the unhurried certainty of someone who has been watching human folly long enough to find it more interesting than distressing. She has been alive long enough that human concerns, the Reverend Trask's self-righteousness, the town's cruelty, the girl's desperation, seem very small and very familiar to her. She gives young Winifred a gift, a spellbook, the one bound in human skin, the one with the eye on the cover, the one that any fan of the original film will recognize immediately with a full-body shiver of delighted recognition. It's an extraordinary prop, and the sequel treats it with the reverence it deserves. The Mother Witch tells Winnie that this book will help her, guide her, speak to her when she needs guidance, and protect her when she needs protection. But she also gives a warning that, in classic fairy tale fashion, young Winifred doesn't fully absorb. There's a cost. There's a price woven into the book's nature that isn't obvious from the outside. There's always a cost. That's the first law of magic in any folklore tradition worth its salt. Nothing is given freely. Everything that is gained requires something in return. This prologue accomplishes several things simultaneously with remarkable efficiency. It humanizes Winifred Sanderson in a way the original film never had the time or inclination to do, and the effect is genuinely revelatory. Suddenly, a character you've always loved as a villain becomes something more complicated and more sympathetic. It gives us the origin story of the spellbook, that mysterious, living artifact that has been at the center of both films. It establishes the sisters' bond as the emotional core of the entire narrative, making explicit what the original film implied, that these three women are at the deepest possible level each other's reason for being. And it plants a thematic seed, a seed about power, ambition, vulnerability, and the terrible price of magic that will flower into the film's most devastating and beautiful moment in the final act. It's a genuinely strong opening. Strong enough, honestly, that some viewers might feel a slight drop in energy when we cut to present day, because the period setting is so visually lush and the emotional stakes feel so immediate. But stay with it, because what comes next earns a transition. We jump forward to present-day Salem, Massachusetts. And the first thing we notice is that this Salem has fully, enthusiastically, almost self-consciously committed to its witch trial history as a year-round tourist attraction that shifts into maximum overdrive every October. There are pumpkins everywhere, Halloween decorations in every shop window, witch imagery on every sign, every awning, every coffee cup. The town's relationship to its own dark heritage is simultaneously genuinely felt and commercially mediated, and the film captures that specific quality. The way a place can be haunted and touristy at the same time, with a light touch that suggests the filmmakers actually understand Salem, rather than just using it as generic spooky backdrop. Our protagonist is Becca, a 16-year-old girl who is celebrating her birthday. And not just any birthday, her 16th birthday. The same age Winifred was in the prologue. That parallel is entirely intentional, and the film underlines it carefully enough that you know it's doing something deliberate with the symmetry without being so heavy-handed that it feels like an announcement. Becca has a tradition, and it's a beautiful one. Every year on her birthday, because her birthday falls on Halloween, she and her two best friends go out into the woods at night to observe what they call a birthday ritual. Candles, crystals, a small, careful arrangement of natural objects, intention spoken aloud into the night air. It's not serious witchcraft in any practice sense. It's teenage friendship magic, the kind of ceremony that 2 or 3 close friends invent together over years of intimacy. That means everything to them, and might look slightly ridiculous to anyone outside the circle. It's the kind of thing that makes perfect sense for a kid growing up in Salem, where the witch aesthetic is part of the cultural water supply, and where every October is a reminder that this place has always believed, on some level, that certain people have a different relationship to the world than ordinary citizens. But this year, something is different. Cassie, and this is where the film introduces its most important emotional complication, has a new boyfriend, Mike, the mayor's son. And Mike comes a social world that Cassie seems increasingly drawn to, a world of football games and popular kid parties, and a certain kind of conventional teenage social life that doesn't leave much room for birthday rituals in the woods with your slightly unconventional childhood friends. So there's already a fracture in the trio before the film has been going for 10 minutes. And it's the kind of fracture that feels completely, painfully true to teenage experience. The slow drift that happens when one friend starts becoming someone slightly different, starts orbiting a new social gravity, starts making choices that create a subtle distance from the people who knew them before the new gravity took hold. Becca is hurt by this. She's hurt in the particular way that teenagers are hurt when something that has always been reliable begins to show signs of change, not with dramatic confrontation, but with quiet anxiety and the small ache of feeling slightly left behind. Izzy is hurt too, and Cassie, caught between her old world and her new one, is perhaps the most internally conflicted of the three, though the film doesn't give her quite enough screen time to fully explore that complexity. This friend dynamic is where the film's real thematic work begins, because what Hocus Pocus 2 is ultimately about, and I want you to hold on to this observation, because we'll develop it fully in the theme section, is sisterhood in its broadest sense. It's about female bonds. It's about the magic that exists between women who choose each other, and what threatens that magic, and what you have to be willing to do and sacrifice and admit in order to preserve it. Enter Gilbert. Sam Richardson is simply a delight in this role, and I want to spend a moment on why. Because he's doing something specific that deserves recognition. Gilbert runs a local magic shop called a Magic Shop. Yes, with the extra P. Because Salem. And he's clearly one of those people who has built his entire identity around an obsession that most people find slightly eccentric. He loves the Sanderson sisters the way certain people love Elvis or the Beatles or specific cult movies, with a fervor that goes beyond casual appreciation into something closer to devotion. His shop is essentially a shrine. The Sanderson sisters' stuff isn't merchandise for Gilbert. It's sacred objects. Becca and Izzy visit his shop. Cassie is begged off. She's with Mike. And Gilbert, in a moment of seemingly warm, generous, good-natured gift-giving, presents Becca with a black flame candle for her birthday. An actual black flame candle. Not a replica, not a novelty item, not a tourist trinket. The real thing. And here is where Gilbert's true nature begins to reveal itself. Not yet fully, not yet completely, but in the slight hesitation before he hands it over, in the particular quality of his smile as he watches her take it. Any self-respecting fan of the original will clock immediately what is about to happen, because the rules are the rules, and the original established them clearly. A black flame candle, lit by a virgin on Halloween night, will resurrect the Sanderson sisters and give them until sunrise to accomplish their goals. Becca is 16. It's Halloween. It's her birthday. She lights that candle in the woods. To the film's credit, and this is a screenwriting choice that could have gone wrong, but doesn't. Becca's ignorance here is entirely plausible. Gilbert gives her the candle without explanation. He presents it as a gift. She has no frame of reference for its significance. She lights it because it's a ritual, because her candles are supposed to be lit, because that's what you do in the woods on your birthday with your crystals and your intentions. The candle is lit. The sky turns an electric, impossible green. The earth shudders, and out of the ground, in an explosion of smoke and color and cackles and sheer theatrical energy that makes you feel like your TV screen isn't quite big enough to contain what's happening. The Sanderson sisters return, and I cannot overstate how good this moment is. Watching these three actresses burst back onto screen, Midler with her chest puffed out and her eyes blazing, Najimi already sniffing the air in bewildered delight. Parker emerging like something between a beautiful ghost and a very confused angel is genuinely exhilarating. This is not a cautious return. This is not actresses easing tentatively back into characters they haven't played in 30 years. This is a full-throated, full-body, completely committed return. They are themselves from the first frame. Winifred immediately takes command of the situation, which is to say she immediately takes command of every situation, because that is simply what Winifred Sanderson does. She surveys the woods. She notes that things are different, strange. The trees are still trees and the darkness is still dark, but there are lights in the distance that don't look like torches, and the air smells of something she can't quite name. There are glowing rectangles in people's hands. The sky overhead is clear and the moon is full, and it is unambiguously Halloween, which means at least some things haven't changed. And then she reaches for her spellbook, and it's not there. It's at Gilbert's shop. Because of course it is. Because Gilbert has it and has had it and has been keeping it carefully for precisely this occasion. And this is where Gilbert's plan begins to reveal its full shape. The film's second act finds its comedic footing quickly and enthusiastically. The Sandersons emerge in the woods, discover they are in a world they do not recognize, and respond in the most character-consistent ways imaginable. Winifred is contemptuous and imperious. The world may have changed, but she certainly has not, and if the world is going to be confusing and weird, the correct response is obviously to be contemptuous of it. Mary is delighted by literally everything. She cannot stop sniffing. The modern world is a sensory banquet for a witch whose primary magical gift is olfactory, and she is beside herself with joy at every new smell. The exhaust of food, the perfume, the plastic. She's a woman who hasn't had a new smell in 300 years, and now there are thousands of them. And Sarah is Sarah, floating, dreaming, occasionally distracted by something that catches the light in an interesting way. There is something genuinely and specifically funny about a character who processes the entire modern world, with all its technology and commerce and noise, the way a very beautiful cat processes a room, by finding 2 or 3 things interesting and serenely ignoring everything else. They end up at a Walgreens. I don't know who made the specific creative decision, but I would like to send them flowers. The Sanderson sisters in a modern American chain pharmacy is one of the most brilliantly absurd premises in recent family film comedy, and the scene delivers on that premise generously. Winifred discovering the cosmetics aisle and treating it with the reverence of a dragon encountering a treasure hoard. Mary being overwhelmed by the candy section in ways that are entirely too relatable. Sarah finding the hair care products and being genuinely transfixed by the concept of conditioner. It's broad comedy. It's silly comedy. But it's comedy that comes from character rather than situation. And that distinction matters enormously, because comedy that comes from character can make you love the characters even more while you're laughing at them, while comedy that comes purely from situation often leaves you feeling nothing after the joke lands. These Walgreens gags leave you more charmed by the Sandersons than you were before them. But Winifred also has a mission, and she holds on to it through every distraction and every comedic detour with the focused intensity of a woman who has waited 3 centuries for another chance. She needs a magic key maxima, the spell of supreme power that the spellbook contains, the spell so powerful that its ingredients are extraordinary and its requirements severe. She needs to acquire those ingredients, perform the spell, and she needs to do it before sunrise, because the magic that brought them back has limits. The black flame candle gave them one night, one Halloween, until dawn. Meanwhile, Becca and Izzy are dealing with the very practical problem of having accidentally resurrected 3 dangerous witches. They're 16. They have no supernatural training. They have phones and a vague familiarity with Salem's history and each other, which turns out to be more useful than it might sound, but is still clearly insufficient preparation for the situation they're in. The adults in Salem are, almost uniformly, useless, either too wrapped up in Halloween festivities to process what Becca is trying to tell them, or, in the case of the mayor, Cassie's father, too concerned with his own image and the success of his Halloween event to entertain any information that doesn't benefit him politically. As the second act develops, Gilbert's true role in events becomes clearer, and what it reveals is a portrait of fandom taken to its most logical extreme. Gilbert isn't a villain in any conventional sense. He's a true believer. He didn't orchestrate the Sandersons' return out of malice or a desire for power or a plan to use them for some nefarious purpose. He did it because he loves them. He has spent his entire adult life building a shrine to them, learning everything about them, keeping the spellbook safe, waiting for the opportunity to bring them back. Because the one thing he's always wanted, more than anything, is to meet them, to serve them, to be part of their story rather than just a keeper of their memory. This is genuinely funny as a comic premise. But Richardson and the script do something interesting with it. They let the comedy slowly reveal the sadness beneath it. Gilbert is a person whose deepest desire has been to belong to something larger than himself. And he's channeled that desire into a one-sided relationship with 3 women who died 3 centuries ago. When he finally gets what he always wanted, when the sisters are real and present and in his shop, the gap between the idealized version he'd carried in his imagination and the actual complicated, agenda-driven reality of them is both hilarious and quietly heartbreaking. The scene where Gilbert first truly meets the Sanderson sisters is one of the film's comedic highlights. His excitement, his trembling devotion, his willingness to do absolutely anything they ask, and the sisters' complete, cheerful indifference to his feelings creates a comedic dynamic that Sam Richardson and the 3 leads play with genuine timing and precision. Winifred tolerates him. Mary finds him somewhat charming, in the way she finds most things somewhat charming. Sarah barely notices he exists, and Gilbert, confronted with these facts, chooses to interpret them as positively as possible because the alternative, acknowledging that his heroes see him as a means to an end, is too painful to accept. The musical number deserves its own analysis because it's the film's most divisive sequence, and the conversation around it illuminates something real about what the movie is and isn't trying to do. At a Halloween festival in the second act, Winifred discovers a stage and an audience and does what any performer born 4 centuries ago would do with those raw materials. She takes over. What follows is a full production number built around a cover of Blondie's One Way or Another, performed in character by the 3 Sandersons to a crowd that assumes, naturally, that this is part of the entertainment. The affirmative case for this number is strong. Bette Midler is, at her core, a performer, not just an actress, a performer. Someone who understands audiences and stages and the specific electricity that moves between a crowd and someone working that crowd with full commitment. Watching her play a stage in a context where the audience doesn't know she's dangerous is a fascinating inversion of the original film's I Put a Spell on You sequence, where the audience knew she was dangerous and couldn't do anything about it. Kathy Najimy brings tremendous physical comedy to the choreography. Sarah Jessica Parker delivers something dreamily, dangerously beautiful. The skeptical case is also legitimate. The number stops the narrative momentum dead. Unlike the original film's big musical moment, this one doesn't serve a plot function. It's not delivering the spell on the audience. It's not helping Winifred accomplish her goal. It's not doing anything except being spectacular. And in a film that is otherwise fairly tightly constructed around its themes, a pure spectacle moment for spectacle's sake creates a noticeable tonal seam. It feels like it was designed for the trailer, for the social media clip, for the cultural moment of people sharing the 3-second fragment of Bette Midler on a stage, which maybe it was, and which is fine, but it's not organic. The spellbook continues to be one of the film's most interesting ongoing presences, because it's not passive. It has consciousness. It has will. It has something that operates like emotional investment in the people who use it. When Winifred reads the requirements for the Magic Key Maxima, the book provides the information. It can't withhold what it knows. But there is something in the way the film frames those pages, in the quality of the book's eye as it opens and allows her to read, that suggests the book is watching, aware, perhaps hoping that Winifred will read carefully enough to understand not just what the spell requires, but what that requirement will cost. The Magic Key Maxima, as the film gradually reveals, has a final ingredient that is not a physical substance, not an herb or a mineral or a piece of some rare animal. The final ingredient is the willing sacrifice of what the caster loves most deeply, a person, a bond, A relationship so fundamental to the caster's identity that giving it up would be not just loss, but dismemberment. For Winifred, there's only one thing that qualifies. There's only ever been one thing. Her sisters. This revelation reframes everything that came before it. The prologue. The running hand in hand. The centuries of loyalty and survival and shared existence. All of it was building to this moment where the price of supreme power is announced, and we have to ask whether Winifred Sanderson, who has wanted power her entire life, who has spent every waking moment either possessing it or reaching for it, will pay that price. And here's where the film does something genuinely brave, something that earns its climax through the patience of its setup. Because Winifred doesn't see it coming. Not fully. She proceeds with the spell with the focus and determination of a woman who has been waiting her entire existence for this moment, who has learned not to let herself be stopped by doubt or hesitation, who has survived 3 centuries of obstacles by refusing to flinch. She invokes the Magic-Key Maxima. She allows the power to build. She lets the night sky split open and the force of supreme magic pour through her. And then she feels what she gave up to have it. Bette Midler's performance in this sequence, in the moment of horrified recognition, in the way Winifred's face changes when she understands the cost, is one of the finest pieces of acting in either film. It would be easy in a movie like this to play that recognition as pure villainy caught in its own trap. But Midler doesn't play it that way. She plays it as genuine grief. As a person who has just discovered that in reaching for the thing she always told herself would make everything right, she has destroyed the thing that actually made everything right. It is the moment where Winifred Sanderson stops being a villain and becomes a tragedy. The 3 sisters in the aftermath of the spell have a conversation that I genuinely was not prepared for. I want to be honest about that. I have watched enough sequels to entertainment properties. I love to have developed a fairly solid protective instinct, a layer of emotional armor that I keep on during these films to avoid disappointment. Hocus Pocus 2 found a way around that armor. The conversation between the Sandersons in those final minutes is written and performed with a grace and a restraint that the film has been building toward without announcing, and when it arrives fully. Winifred has a choice in the end. She can hold on to the power. The Magic-Key Maxima's energy is still flowing through her. She is, in this moment, the most powerful being in Salem. She can choose to keep that power and use it and pursue the goals she's pursued her entire life. Or she can choose to go, to let the power go, to let the magic go, to step away from everything she has always wanted, and cross to whatever's on the other side, with her sisters beside her. And Winifred Sanderson chooses her sisters. Iron-willed, iron-tongued, imperious, impossible, magnificent Winifred. She chooses love over power. She chooses connection over control. She chooses the thing she has always had over the thing she has always wanted. And in making that choice, and finally, after 349 years of wanting more, choosing to be satisfied with what she has and who she loves, she achieves something that all that power could never have given her. She achieves grace. The 3 of them, hand in hand, go into the light together. There's a look between Winifred and Mary in the final moment. Just a look, just a smile, quiet and certain, and full of something that doesn't have a word in any language I know. That is one of the most affecting things I've seen in any family film in recent years. And the reason it works, the reason it lands with the full weight that it does, is not just because Midler and Najimy are extraordinary performers. It's because the film has spent 90 minutes building to the specific emotional note. The prologue established the bond. The story stressed the bond. The climax threatened the bond. And the ending honors the bond. Everything coheres. Becca, Izzy, and Cassie stand in the aftermath. The Sandersons are gone. The night sky clears into early morning gray. Salem is still Salem, still draped in its Halloween best, still carrying its centuries of complicated history, still half believing and half performing the beliefs it sells to tourists and passes down to children. The 3 girls walk away together, closer than they've been all night. The friendship that began to fracture at the beginning of the film has been sealed by shared danger and shared honesty, and a particular intimacy that comes from going through something extraordinary with the people you love. Billy Butcher's son gets his quiet, physical, characteristically Doug Jones-esque resolution. He helped throughout the night, first reluctantly, then with something that looked almost like genuine investment. His final moments carried a theme of choosing loyalty over resentment, of letting go of old wounds rather than defining yourself by them. Billy was wronged by Winifred, profoundly, fatally wronged. And yet there's something in his final regard for her that transcends grievance, something that might be respect, something that might be sorrow. Doug Jones communicates it entirely through posture and stillness, and a particular quality of stillness that is one of his specific gifts as a performer. Doug Jones is one of those performers whose work is almost always technically invisible to casual viewers because it's hidden inside prosthetics, special effects makeup, and physical transformation, but whose absence will be immediately felt. The reason Billy Butcher's son works across both films as something more than a visual gag is entirely because Jones brings genuine humanity to a character who is literally a corpse. The slightly hunched posture, the careful way he holds his jaw, the specific quality of watchful attention in his eyes, all of it constitutes a complete performance that no amount of digital effects could replace. Jones has spent his entire career doing this work, building characters inside physical constraints that would defeat most performers, and Billy Butcher's son is one of the finer examples in his considerable catalog. And somewhere in Salem, in a magic shop on a quiet street, the spellbook closes its eye and waits. Now let's examine in real depth the performances that power this film, because they deserve more than passing praise. They deserve careful attention. There is simply no version of Hocus Pocus, either film, any iteration, that works without Bette Midler. This is as close to an absolute truth as the film criticism of any specific performance can come. She is the gravitational center around which everything orbits. Every other performance in the film calibrates itself in relation to her, finds its energy and its register in dialogue with hers. And in Hocus Pocus 2, she does something that requires not just talent but genuine artistic courage. She deepens comedic character without compromising the comedy. She makes Winifred more complex without making her less fun. She adds layers of vulnerability and tragedy without stripping away the imperious bluster that is Winifred's most defining characteristic. Midler's performance in the comedic sequences is as sharp and as fully committed as it has ever been. The physical comedy, the line readings, the precise calibration, contempt, and delight, all of it is exactly right. There is a specific face Midler makes as Winifred when she encounters something in the modern world that offends or confuses her, a kind of compressed, withering dismissiveness that is one of the funniest things in the film and also one of the most completely characterful. You know exactly who this woman is from that face. You know her history and her pride and her fundamental inability to accept that anything could be beyond her understanding or beneath her dignity. And then, in the third act, Midler shifts. The shift is so smooth and so well prepared by everything that came before it that it doesn't feel like a shift. It feels like a reveal, like a door opening in a wall you didn't know had a door. Winifred in the film's final sequences is not a different character from the Winifred of the opening sequences. She's the same woman, but we're finally seeing all of her. The ambition and the fear beneath the ambition, the love and the terror of that love, the possibility that has always existed within her for something other than conquest. The final scene is Bette Midler's finest work in this franchise. That is not a statement I make lightly. Kathy Najimy's Mary is the film's beating heart, the character who most purely embodies the film's core message about the value of uncomplicated love. Mary doesn't have an arc in the traditional sense. She doesn't change. She doesn't have a revelation. She is, from the first scene to the last, exactly and entirely herself, devoted, enthusiastic, slightly absurd, deeply warm. And in a film about what love is worth, Mary's unwavering, unambiguous, uncalculating love for her sisters is a standard against which everything else is measured. There's a specific comedic quality that Najimy brings to Mary that is worth examining carefully, because it's rarer than it looks. Mary is not simply dumb. She is not simply slow. She processes the world through a different kind of intelligence, one that is primarily sensory and emotional rather than logical or strategic. She notices what things smell like and how they make her feel. She responds to the world with genuine, immediate emotion, without the filter of strategy or calculation. This makes her, paradoxically, one of the most honest characters in the film. What Mary thinks, Mary says. What Mary feels, Mary shows. There is no gap between her interior life and her exterior expression, which is simultaneously the funniest thing about her and the most touching. Najimi's physical comedy has a specific quality of controlled abandon. She commits completely to the physical gag, but never loses control of what the scene needs. There's a scene in the Walgreens where Mary interacts with display of Halloween candy with an expression of such pure, religious reverence that the joke works not because candy is inherently funny, but because the reverence is absolutely sincere. That's the mark of great comedy. The commitment is real, which is why the joke lands. Najimi also does something very specific in the film's final act that deserves recognition. When the three sisters are confronting what Winifred's spell has caused, Mary's response is the simplest and the most devastating. She doesn't strategize. She doesn't look for solutions. She doesn't make arguments. She just holds on. She holds on to her sisters. She has been holding on for 300 years, and she is not going to stop now. That simplicity, in that moment, is more emotionally powerful than any speech the film could have written for her. Sarah Jessica Parker's Sarah Sanderson occupies a unique comic space that requires something specific and unusual to execute. The comedy of pure, sustained, completely committed weirdness. Sarah is strange, not eccentric strange, not quirky strange, genuinely, fundamentally, otherworldly strange. She processes reality through a completely different perceptual filter than any other character in the film, and Parker has never, in either film, given any indication that this is anything other than Sarah's natural state. There is no performance in Parker's performance. Sarah is not pretending to be strange. She simply is. The comedy that comes from this, from watching someone move through the world as though slightly out of phase with it, is consistent and reliable throughout the film. But Parker also does something interesting in the film's final sequences. She allows Sarah's strangeness to become briefly, beautifully clear. In the moment when the three sisters are saying goodbye to the world, Sarah is fully present, fully herself, and her version of presence, even at its most lucid, is still unmistakably and unreplicably Sarah Sanderson. Whitney Peake carries the film's protagonist role with quiet, naturalistic confidence. This is not a showy performance. It doesn't try to compete with what the three leads are doing, and it's wise enough to know that competing would be futile. What Peake brings is genuine warmth, genuine intelligence, and a consistent sense of internal life that makes Becca feel like a real person rather than a function. Her arc, from confused 16-year-old to young woman beginning to understand her own magical nature, is handled with restraint and with enough specificity that the growth feels earned. Belisa Escobedo as Izzy is the film's most consistent source of grounded comedic energy in the protagonist's storyline. Izzy is funny. She is loyal. She is a character least plagued by internal complication, and Escobedo plays all of that with an ease and naturalness that makes her tremendously likable. Her chemistry with Peake is warm and genuine. You believe in their friendship completely. Lilia Buckingham has the hardest job in the teenage storyline, because Cassie is a character whose arc is most important to film's themes and least well served by the film structure. Buckingham does what she can with the screen time she's given, and her best scenes, the ones where Cassie has to confront what she's been doing to her friends and make a choice about what she values, are genuinely effective. But she needs more runway than the script provides. Sam Richardson, as discussed, is doing something specific and beautiful with Gilbert. He is playing a character who is, on paper, simply a comedy type, the obsessive superfan, and finding within that type a genuine human need, a genuine loneliness, a genuine love that has been focused on an object that cannot love him back. It's a performance that could easily have been one-dimensional, but is instead, quietly, one of the film's most emotionally resonant. The specific thing Richardson does that elevates a performance is his refusal to play Gilbert as oblivious. Gilbert knows, on some level, that what he's doing is strange. He knows that building your entire adult life around 3 women who died 300 years ago is an unusual life choice. He has simply decided, somewhere along the way, that the alternative, a life without that devotion, a life not organized around something larger than himself, would be worse. Richardson plays this awareness carefully, letting it surface in small moments between the bigger comedy beats. A glance that suggests self-consciousness. A pause that suggests someone very briefly reckoning with their own reflection. These moments don't undercut the comedy. They deepen it, because they make Gilbert's absurdity feel chosen rather than innate, which is infinitely more interesting. His arc, from orchestrator the sisters' return to reluctant help of the girls who need to stop them, is one of the film's more satisfying small-scale character journeys. It doesn't require him to become a hero. It just requires him to become slightly more honest with himself about the difference between loving something and using it, between devotion and exploitation. Richardson lands that moment of self-reckoning with real grace, and Hannah Waddingham, in 10 minutes of screen time, leaves an impression that outlasts the film itself. The mother, which is ancient and knowing and possessed of a sadness that suggests she has seen too much of human nature over her long existence to be shocked by any of it. Waddingham plays that antiquity not with theatrics, but with stillness, with a quality of presence that fills the frame without demanding it. It is an extraordinary cameo performance, and it sets the emotional template for everything the film attempts to do with its themes of power and love and the long cost of magic. What Waddingham brings to the mother, which that a lesser performer might not, as a specific quality of informed sorrow. The mother which has seen this before. She has seen ambitious, frightened, brilliant women reach for power as a solution to powerlessness, and she knows where it leads. She gives Winifred the book not because she thinks it will save her. She has been alive long enough to know better, but perhaps because she thinks the journey is the only way through. The gift contains a lesson, but the lesson can only be learned from the inside, which means the book must be given even knowing what will follow. Waddingham conveys all of this with a look and a hesitation, and the specific quality of a woman who has stopped expecting anyone to listen to warnings but give them anyway, because it is the right thing to do. In 10 minutes, it is exceptional work. The thematic architecture of Hocus Pocus 2 is more coherent and more purposeful than many viewers initially credit, and it deserves a real examination. The film organizes itself around a central metaphor, 2 versions of sisterhood, in dialogue with each other across the length of the story. The Sanderson sisters represent the first version, blood-bonded, centuries deep, tested by every possible hardship, and found unbreakable. Becca, Izzy, and Cassie represent the second version, chosen sisterhood, the kind that has to be actively maintained and renewed, the kind that is vulnerable to the ordinary pressures of growing up and growing apart. The film uses these 2 versions not to compete with each other, but to illuminate each other. The Sandersons' absolute, unquestioned bond serves as a mirror for the girls' more fragile one, showing them, in the audience, what it looks like when female love is complete and certain, while the girls' story shows the Sandersons, in the audience, how precious that certainty is and how easily it can be threatened. What the film does particularly well is refusing to sentimentalize either version of sisterhood. The Sanderson sisters' bond is presented as real and deep and precious, but the film doesn't pretend it's without cost or complication. 300 years of shared existence, 300 years of being each other's only constant. That kind of proximity creates its own tensions, its own dynamics, its own quiet negotiations that are never fully articulated, but are present in the way the sisters interact with each other. Winifred leads. Mary follows and supports. Sarah orbits according to her own internal logic. This dynamic has presumably been stable for centuries, and the film doesn't pretend it's perfectly frictionless. It just shows us that the friction has been absorbed by something strong enough to contain it. The feminist undercurrent of the original film, always present, never quite foreground, becomes explicit here in ways that feel both appropriate and careful. The prologue makes a direct argument. The Sanderson sisters became witches not because of some innate evil, but because they refused to accept the limited roles that their society prescribed for them. They were punished for that refusal. They were condemned for that refusal. Their entire existence as supernatural antagonists in the first film is rooted in a persecution that the 1692 trials make historically legible in ways that are impossible to ignore if you're paying attention. By grounding Winifred's origin story in the specific social reality of Puritan New England, the arranged marriages, the religious authority, the complete absence of female self-determination, the film makes an argument that the first Hocus Pocus always implied but never stated. These women are not simply evil. They are women who were forced to become something extraordinary because the ordinary was denied them. Their power is real and their methods are violent, and they do genuinely terrible things. But the source of all of it is the same source as any number of historical and contemporary stories about women who have been denied agency and found alternative routes to power. That doesn't make them innocent. The film doesn't argue that it does. But it makes them comprehensible in a way that purely enjoying them as comic villains never quite allowed. And comprehensibility, the ability to see yourself in someone, even someone doing terrible things, is what separates memorable characters from cartoons. The original Sanderson sisters were beloved cartoons, in the best sense of the word. The sequel asks us to see them as something more. It's also worth noting the specific symbolic weight of the Reverend Trask as the antagonist of the prologue. Tony Hale's portrayal deserves more attention than it typically receives. Trask is not a raving monster. He's something more insidious, a man who believes sincerely in his own righteousness, who is genuinely convinced that what he's doing is correct, who mistakes his authority for wisdom and his control for care. He doesn't hate Winifred. He doesn't even particularly dislike her. He simply cannot conceive of her as a person with her own will and her own destiny. This is a more sophisticated portrait of institutional harm than most Disney films attempt, and it makes Winifred's flight into forest feel not just sympathetic, but absolutely necessary. The Magic Key Maxima as the film's central symbolic device is one of its cleverest constructions. The supreme spell, the ultimate power, requires the sacrifice of love as its final ingredient. This is older than literature. It appears in folklore traditions across cultures and centuries, the idea that the highest magic costs the highest price. But the film uses it with specific precision. For Winifred specifically, the thing she loves most is the thing she's been protecting and fighting for her entire life. The supreme irony is that in reaching for the power that would protect her sisters, she has to destroy what that protection was always for. This is not a new irony. Greek tragedy is built on this irony. Macbeth is built on this irony. But the film earns a right to use it by preparing for it carefully and by having Midler capable of carrying the full emotional weight when it arrives. Becca's emerging magic being love-based rather than fear-based is the film's most quietly radical thematic statement. Most fantasy narratives about power locate its source in individual will. The hero who is uniquely gifted, uniquely strong, uniquely suited to their destiny. Becca's magic doesn't work that way. It grows in proportion to her relationships, to how deeply she cares about the people around her, to how fully she allows herself to be vulnerable to that caring. It is literally the opposite of Winifred's magic, and the film uses that opposition to make an argument about what real strength looks like. Not the absence of vulnerability, but the willingness to embrace it. Not independence, but the acknowledgement of how much we need each other. The spellbook as moral conscience is a subtle but consistent element throughout both films that receives its fullest development here. The book is alive. It has awareness. It has something that operates like sorrow. It cannot prevent the people who use it from making destructive choices. Free will is presumably outside its jurisdiction, but it is present for all of it, witnessing, recording, perhaps hoping. The image of the book closing its eye in the final moments of the film, retiring, resting, releasing something, is one of the most quietly affecting images in the film. It suggests a creature that has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has finally been able to set it down. And Fletcher's direction demonstrates consistent visual intelligence throughout the film. The prologue is a visual high point. Its period design is authentic and specific. Its color palette immediately distinctive. Its sense of historical atmosphere genuinely achieved. The present-day Salem sequences are rendered with a warmth and specificity that suggests a production team that actually did their homework on what this town looks and feels like. Fletcher handles the Sanderson sisters with a particular visual intelligence that deserves recognition. She frames them differently from the human characters. They occupy more of the frame, they're lit more dramatically, the camera moves differently around them. This isn't just aesthetic preference. It's a visual language that keeps the sisters mythological even in contemporary settings, that preserves their extraordinary nature even when they're standing in a Walgreens arguing about face cream. The mundane setting throws their supernatural energy into sharper relief precisely because the camera refuses to normalize them. They are always visually creatures from another time and another register of existence. The decision to shoot the prologue with a slightly desaturated, cooler color temperature, letting the warmth only creep in around firelight and lantern glow, creates an immediate visual code for the past that the film maintains with discipline. When we move to present-day Salem and the palette shifts to the warm orange gold of Halloween America, the contrast is strong enough to establish the temporal distance between then and now without a single word of dialogue being needed. That's direction working at the level of visual storytelling rather than just illustration. Fletcher's strongest skill as a director is her management of ensemble chemistry. She is clearly comfortable with groups of women working together. She understands how to position actors relative to each other to maximize comedic and dramatic interaction. She knows when to let a scene breathe and when to cut, and she has the specific patience required to let physical comedy develop without rushing to the punchline. The Walgreens sequence and the Halloween festival sequence both demonstrate these skills at their best. There's a particular two-shot she uses repeatedly of Midler and Najimy that captures the decades of familiarity between these performers in a single image. You can see the chemistry not just in what they're doing, but in how much space they're comfortable leaving for each other to fill. The film's cinematography deploys a color language that is consistent and deliberate. The warm golden-orange palette of present-day Salem, all autumn tones and firelight and carved pumpkin glow, creates an immediate emotional atmosphere of nostalgic warmth that is exactly right for the material. The supernatural sequences shift into cooler, more electric tones, greens and blues and the specific acid green of the candle's flame, that visually distinguish magic from the mundane world. The prologue's desaturated amber is both historically evocative and tonally distinct from both other registers, marking it as something apart and fundamental. There's a particular shot in the finale, wide, on the empty meeting house site, after the Sandersons are gone, that is simply, quietly beautiful. Just an empty lot, some scattered remnant of the spell, the first gray light of dawn touching the edge of the sky. It's held a beat longer than it needs to be. And it's exactly right. It's the film taking a breath, acknowledging what just happened before moving toward resolution. It's a directorial choice that reflects real confidence. The confidence to let silence do what no dialogue could. The score by Christopher Lennertz handles the difficult challenge of working within the shadow of a beloved original score with genuine craft. The familiar musical motifs from John Debney's original are present but deployed with restraint. They appear at specific emotional trigger points rather than being spread throughout the film, which reserves their power as signals. When you hear those notes, you feel something specific. That feeling is protected by the score's refusal to exhaust it through overuse. The original pieces Lennertz composes for the sequel's own emotional moments, particularly in the final act, are lovely. There's a lullaby quality to the film's closing music that works on the audience precisely the way it's designed to. The sound design is worth noting briefly because it's often overlooked in discussions of a film this colorful and visually driven. The Sanderson sisters have specific sonic signatures, the crack and hiss of Winifred's magic, the particular quality of Sarah's singing, even the specific rhythm of Mary's sniffing, that are maintained from the original and feel immediately recognizable. Sound in horror and fantasy-adjacent films does enormous emotional work, and Hocus Pocus 2's sound team clearly understood that maintaining these specific audio signatures was as important as maintaining the visual ones. The production design throughout is meticulous in its attention to detail. The Magic Shop is a genuinely wonderful set, a real fan's fantasy of what a Salem magic shop dedicated to the Sanderson sisters should look like, with every surface telling its own small story and Easter eggs tucked into corners for attentive viewers to find. The Sanderson sisters' costumes walk a fine line between faithful recreation and subtle advancement, suggesting these are the same clothes worn for 300 more years rather than fresh recreations. Small details of wear and history are visible in the texture of the fabric and the aging of the accessories. The Salem exterior locations, whatever combination of actual location shooting and set construction was used, feel genuinely like a real American town that has been living with its own mythology for centuries. Here is the honest critical assessment. Hocus Pocus 2 is a film with real strengths and real limitations, and intellectual honesty requires naming both without letting sentiment tip the scale either way. Part of respecting a property and its audience is being honest about what works and what doesn't. The fans of this film deserve real criticism, not just celebration. The genuine strengths. The three leads are unambiguously extraordinary. The prologue is the film's bravest and most successful choice. The thematic coherence is real and meaningful, and the emotional finale is a genuine achievement that goes beyond what anyone should reasonably have expected from a Disney Plus Halloween sequel to a 30-year-old comedy. These are not small things. These are the kind of things that elevate a film from competent execution to something worth remembering and returning to. The genuine weaknesses. The teenage protagonists, despite strong performances, are less fully realized than their equivalents in the original. Omri Katz, Thora Birch, and Vanessa Shaw in the 1993 film had a genuine, specific dynamic that made them feel like real teenagers rather than plot instruments. The sibling bickering between Max and Danny, the slightly awkward romantic tension between Max and Allison, Danny's specific quality of being simultaneously the most childlike and the most practically capable character in the story. The sequel's teenagers are likable and well-performed, but don't quite achieve that same specific gravity. They feel more generic, more interchangeable, more designed around their narrative function rather than discovered as specific people. The Cassie storyline, which carries the film's most important emotional thread about the fragility of chosen bonds, is resolved too quickly after being established too lightly. For a storyline that is meant to parallel and illuminate the Sanderson sisters' own arc, it needed more weight, more screen time, more difficult conversation between the characters before the resolution could feel genuinely earned rather than convenient. The middle section of the film is episodic in ways that suggest some of the Sandersons' individual set pieces were written as standalone comic sequences and then stitched into a through line after the fact, rather than being developed as escalating beats in a continuous narrative. This is a common structural problem in comedy writing. The gag is priority over the arc, and it creates a noticeable sense of wheels spinning in the film's midsection, where you can feel the story holding its breath before the third act begins. The visual effects, particularly in the climactic spell sequence, are notably underbaked for a major studio production. There are specific shots where the CG elements separate visually from the live action in ways that break the immersion of the scene, which is particularly unfortunate given that those shots are supposed to be the visual apotheosis of the film's supernatural stakes. For a streaming production, the budget may have been genuinely constrained, but the effect is one of ambition outrunning resources. And the musical number, as discussed, functions more as a standalone clip than an organic plot moment. It's entertaining, it's well executed, and it stops the film dead in its tracks. Compared to other legacy sequels of its era, the film holds up well. It is more emotionally ambitious than Ghostbusters, Afterlife, and more confident in its new characters than that film was. It achieves something similar to Top Gun, Maverick in its basic strategy. Trust the original performances. Find something genuinely new to say about the characters. Let the nostalgia carry the audience into the new story rather than being the entire story. Though it executes that strategy less perfectly than Maverick did, what sets it apart from both is the willingness to give its villain a genuine tragedy. That's unusual. That's the film's most singular creative achievement, and it should be acknowledged as such. The decision to let Winifred Sanderson have a redemptive ending rather than a defeated one is a bold choice that the film earns through the quality of its third act writing and performance. The final assessment, then, Hocus Pocus 2 is not a perfect film. It doesn't need to be, What it is a genuinely good film that cares deeply about what it's doing and mostly does it well. It honors the original without being enslaved to it. It tells a new story that has real thematic purpose. It gives three extraordinary performers a platform to demonstrate that they have deepened, not diminished, in their relationship to these characters over 3 decades. And most importantly, most essentially, it understands what people actually loved about the first film. Not the plot, not the special effects, not even the set pieces, as good as the original ones were. What people loved was the relationship, the bond between those 3 sisters, the electric, devoted, slightly chaotic love between Winifred and Mary and Sarah. The film takes that love as its subject matter rather than its backdrop, and in doing so, it earns the right to exist alongside the original rather than simply in its shadow. I want to dwell on this point for a moment because I think it's the key to understanding why Hocus Pocus 2 works as well as it does, and why its failures are ultimately secondary to its successes. In the landscape of 2022 legacy sequels, the dominant creative failure mode was a film that understood its original's plot, but not its soul. Ghostbusters. Afterlife knew the mythology of the original Ghostbusters backward and forward. It assembled all the correct pieces, the proton packs, the Stay Puft imagery, the musical cues, the cameos. And yet many viewers felt when it was over that something essential was missing. The soul of what made the original Ghostbusters matter wasn't in the equipment or the mythology. It was in the specific chemistry of 4 very particular people who loved and annoyed each other in very specific ways. A film full of correct pieces, but missing that chemistry was, in a meaningful sense, a film that didn't understand what it was about. Hocus Pocus 2 makes the opposite error profile. It occasionally fumbles the pieces, the middle section, the secondary characters, the visual effects, but understands the soul of the original with remarkable precision. It knows that the Sanderson sisters are not interesting because they're powerful witches who do powerful witch things. They're interesting because of the specific, ridiculous, magnificent chemistry between 3 women who cannot imagine existing without each other. Everything the film does with the Magic-Key Maxima and the Winifred's arc and the emotional finale flows from that understanding. The film doesn't just use the sisters. It understands them. And that understanding is what allows it to do something new with them rather than simply recreating what already exists. Let me also say something about the experience of watching this film as a fan of the original, because that experience is relevant and real and worth articulating honestly. There's a specific joy in watching a beloved character return on screen that is distinct from the joy of encountering that character for the first time. The first time you meet them, you're discovering. The second or third time, the return, the sequel, the revival, you're recognizing. And recognition, when it's handled well, produces something that discovery can't. The warm certainty of knowing that the thing you loved was real, was worth the love, and has survived. That the years between then and now haven't diminished it. Hocus Pocus 2 produces that feeling. When those 3 women come out of the earth in that first act, when they are immediately, completely, unambiguously themselves, the feeling in your chest is not just excitement. It's something closer to gratitude. The gratitude of someone who spent a long time wondering if the thing they loved was as good as they remembered and found out that yes, actually it is. It always was. And here's the proof. That feeling is not nothing. In the context of what this film was built to deliver and what its audience needed from it, that feeling might be everything. My rating for Hocus Pocus 2 is 7.5 out of 10. For fans of the original, it's closer to an 8. For people coming to it fresh with no prior attachment, it's probably a 7. The gap between those numbers tells you something real about what the film is and what it's doing. This movie is for everyone who grew up watching the original and wanted, just one more time, to see those 3 women on screen together. It's for families who want Halloween viewing that's warm and funny, and just spooky enough without being genuinely frightening. It's for anyone who has ever been part of friendship that felt like family and feared the slow drift that comes with growing up. It's for people who believe, or want to believe, that love is more powerful than ambition, It's for people who have October feelings that don't fit anywhere except in the language of pumpkins and candles and old magic, and the specific October dark that smells like fallen leaves and wood smoke and possibility. And it's especially for anyone who has ever watched Bette Midler give performance and felt that specific, ineffable thing that the very best performers produce, that sense of someone so completely alive, so completely present, so completely themselves in front of camera that they generate their own gravitational field. That kind of performer doesn't come along often. When they do, the right response is to pay attention while you have a chance. If you are any of those people, this film will give you what you're looking for. It will give you a few things you weren't expecting. And it will give you, in its last 15 minutes, something genuinely beautiful that you will probably think about the next time October comes around and the leaves start falling and someone puts on a movie about 3 women in Salem who love each other more than they ever loved anything else. The black flame candle has been lit one more time. The Sanderson sisters walk the earth again. And for as long as Halloween exists in this country, for as long as October arrives and people reach for the comfort of the familiar and the warmth of old magic, they will walk the earth every year in our memories and our traditions and our annual returns to that green sky moment when 3 women come back from wherever the dead go and remind us, laughing and cackling, and occasionally raiding a Walgreens, that love persists, that bonds hold, that the people who run with you when you run are the most valuable thing you will ever have. That's it from me. Thank you for spending this time here, deep in the magic and madness of Salem, Massachusetts. If this breakdown served you, drop a like, leave a comment about your favorite Sanderson sister moment. I genuinely want to know. And subscribe so you're here for everything that comes next. And just in case anyone's listening out there in the October dark, somewhere in the carved pumpkin glow, surrounded by the people you love, happy Halloween, witches. Here's to the sisters. All of them.